Okay, and we are live. So hello and welcome to Winterviews Season 4, Episode 8. I am your host, Catherine Silva, Cat for short, and today we have the amazing Sam Richard with us. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. I am tired. Today was a long day.
Yes, agreed.
So for those out there who might not know who you are, although they really all should, because your work is amazing and you are, head of an amazing small horror press. Would you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I guess first and foremost, I am an author of weird horror fiction, two-time award-winning author. I have 4 books out. My most recent is The Still Beating Heart of a Dead God, which came out in December. And it's a short story collection. 3 of my books are short story collections, and then I have a novella, so Sabbath of the Fox Devils, that came out way back in 2020.
Nice.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I like you said. I run Weirdpunk Books. It's a small weird horror press based in Minneapolis. The focus tends to be on horror in the weirder genres: body horror, cosmic horror, existential horror, queer, lots of queer horror, lots of queer writers, not exclusively, but a lot of them, and including myself. And then also the focus of the press tends to be, again, not exclusively, but tends to be books and stories that include either overt or subtle subtext that's anti-fascist, anti-capitalist, queer, anti-authoritarian, kind of leftist vibes. The whole thing runs on punk ethos, sweat, and Miller High Life, and spicy pickles.
Spicy pickles.
Yes.
Interesting. I kind of want to know more about that. Just as a
Yeah, I'm just a huge fan of, specifically, Clausen has a spicy pickle.
okay.
That's like, it's delicious, and I end up eating a lot of them, probably more than I should, salt content wise. But and it's been a minute since I went whole hog, but I just love spicy pickles. They're like one of my all-time favorite things.
So where other people might be running on coffee, you're running on pickle juice / spicy pickles.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, that's the thing, right? A lot of people, it's coffee, or coffee and cigarettes, or some kind of tea, whatever you want. Yeah, for me, it's High Life and spicy pickles.
So there is this really weird phenomenon, and because I work in the outdoor sports industry, there's a whole thing about pickle juice and like its use in like sports drink or sports drink type stuff, and I've never understood it. But well, that's not fair. I understand it because it's the salt content needed after you've done a whole lot of activity. But it's definitely become this like huge thing. And even as somebody that like will take a pickle here and there, like I just like that just seems like a lot to me. I don't know.
Yeah, that might be. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I would do that, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
That's a bit much.
It's interesting. I just it's odd as a craving to want a pickle after like a long run.
Yeah.
But I digress. I'm getting off topic. So we were here to talk about weird horror. I inadvertently started giving you questions though about weird fiction, which is an entirely different thing. And for me and for the people in the audience, I think it would be really awesome to know what the difference is
Yeah.
between weird fiction and weird horror.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Going back a little ways for me, when I first started being involved in small press stuff and in writing and publishing in this kind of realm, Emma Alice Johnson, who started Weird Punk, is a award-winning author on her own right, fantastic writer. I put out a book of hers last year called Love
Okay.
Skull, but she's been around for years, and she's the one who got me into this world. I primarily entered into this world through the bizarro fiction like genre and community, and
Hmm.
that's the award I won. I won the Wonderland for my first collection, To All of
Wow.
Ash and Other Sorrows, and I've never considered myself to be like a pure bizarro writer. It's just a community that I have been a part of. And I
Hmm.
love, there's some incredible bizarro writers who've written and continue to write incredible books. It's not a genre I have anything against. I just never felt like my work was weird enough to be that. I think it was
Hmm.
informed by some of those tendencies that a lot of those authors use, right? There's like a dream, like a kind of dream logic in that realm of fiction
Okay.
that I really like. I love using dream logic, having a story have a logic that doesn't make sense to us, but it follows its own kind of internal strange logic is a
Yeah.
thing that I love in fiction all around, but I think it especially works for horror. So
Okay.
originally in I think the first Bizarro Con I ever went to, which is 2015 or 2016, I was standing around in the like the main house that the a lot of the parties happen in. I was standing in a circle with Brendan Vidito. We had like just met that weekend. He is now one of my best friends. I published his book, Pornography for the End of the World. We also did the
Mhm.
new Flesh together. It was the first title that Weird Punk put out, just Weird Punk, after I had taken over. It was like my pivoting the press. He and I and Charles Austin Muir, who's also an incredible writer, uh, we were sitting around like or standing around in a circle, drinking beer, talking during this party,
Mhm.
and we were all talking about our own work and what we thought our work was. And
Yeah.
we all started using this term, and I don't know who first came up with it, and I know other people have used it. I have seen, right, there's Weird Horror Magazine is a thing that exists and is awesome. Um, I hadn't seen anybody use it at this point, but I'm not saying we like own or claimed this title for just ourselves. But we all kind of came to this like, yeah, I think what I really write is weird horror. It's
Mhm.
too weird for kind of a mainstream tropey horror vibe, but it's not
Yeah.
weird enough to be pure bizarro or bizarro even. It's its own thing. It's
Okay.
in its own column. And for me, as time has progressed, both with my own work and with the press, I've kind of defined that term as being like an overarching genre that a few subgenres of horror fit under. It's almost like a category umbrella.
Okay.
The genres that fit within it for me are body horror, cosmic horror,
Mhm.
existential horror, and splatterpunk in the way that not just gross out, but like splatterpunk should have a message behind it, right? The punk
Yeah.
in splatterpunk is very important. And a lot of people have forgotten that, but to me, that's like the essence of the genre. So like
Yeah.
those kind of those four, plus I would say like weird fiction straddles a line where it partially sits below that umbrella, but also sits among its own, right? Because there's big conversations I think that people have had about whether or not weird fiction is innately horror or not. Is it a
Yeah.
subgenre of horror? Is it its own genre? I tend to think of it as it's almost like a line straddling genre
Okay.
that does both. It's kind of its own thing. It's kind of horror, and I think it sits within the weird horror umbrella. Which the ironic part is, I also think that like weird horror owes a debt to weird fiction. Like it wouldn't exist without that
Mhm.
history. But I think it's also like where it fits within horror is under
Yeah.
weird horror. And that's
Okay.
my little manifesto. This isn't, again, like, I don't know that anyone else is using this term that same way, but it's what I consider all of the books I publish under Weirdpunk. Right? Because they don't, at least from my perspective, right, none of the books I've published are traditional, right? They're not, even if the story isn't like super gonzo crazy, it still doesn't necessarily follow like the expected trope like route within horror, which is just, I think, something I've always kind of tried to push against both at the press and my own work, is the idea
Yeah.
that like, horror has to be reliant on these certain things, and like certain types of stories and certain way the stories play out. And that
Yep.
to me is like, I'm just wholly uninterested in that. I'm
Sure.
interested in
Yeah.
things that do something else. And so when I say weird horror, to me that encapsulates like a history within the genre of things like the Del Abyss line of books, again, which is like one of my favorite publishers of all time. But that's where you get Kathy Koja, right? The Cipher, you get
Hmm.
Dennis Etchison, like Poppy C. Bright, aka Billy Martin, was published by Del Abyss, Nancy Holder, like so many fantastic writers in that time. Michael Arnzen, I always want to shout him out because he's an amazing guy as well as being an amazing writer. But you have all of these writers in that kind of early 90s to mid 90s era who were publishing stuff that was doing that, like pushing against the perception of what horror could be, doing
Hmm.
something very different, and also pulling influences from outside of the genre. I think about Kathy Koja a lot because she's one of my favorite writers, but the way she was pulling in like prose influence and vibes from people like William Burroughs and Kathy Acker, and
Hmm.
that kind of transgressive experimental writing style that like makes her prose, like that influence on it, my assumption of influence on it, made her prose sing in a way that like had never been seen in horror, because it's just like this
Hmm.
unique weird thing where she's pulling new ideas and new vibes and new techniques into the genre. And that to me is like the essence of weird horror.
Okay. So I think that a lot of my questions then will relate more to weird horror
Yeah.
as I had thought of them, because I've just been under this misconception that they were the same thing. And a lot of that is because I have tried to, Google
Right.
Google weird horror, and weird fiction comes up every
Yep.
time.
Yep.
And I had somebody last year on the program who wanted to do weird fiction. And I was thinking, okay, it's weird horror. But then when I looked it up, I was like, oh, okay, this is not what I thought it was. But I'm much more familiar with weird horror because I, well, it seems like it's a more, maybe not, it's becoming a more of a phenomenon. Like we definitely had those writers in the 90s who were pushing the genre, making it what it is, but now it's definitely exploded.
Yep.
And there's a lot more writers writing in that genre.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so my first question
Yeah.
with that in mind, as I go to my phone to look at the screenshotted picture that I took, um, is what was your initial draw to writing weird horror?
I had wanted to be and kind of struggled to try to be a writer since high school. It was just something that I've always loved books. I've always loved reading. I think I principally get that from my dad, who passed in October. He was like a prolific reader and had a massive library of like mass market sci-fi, fantasy, and horror paperbacks, as
Mhm.
well as he was a huge science and history nerd. So he had a lot of that stuff too, a lot of nonfiction. But I would just like pull a book off being like pretty young. He was also a comics guy and read a lot of weird indie comics. So like I
Okay.
remember like finding a copy of a mouse floppy like in the back seat of his car, getting into it once and like looking through it, being like, I don't know what
Mhm.
this is, but this is intense. Like the cats
Yeah.
are Nazis. Like, whoa, what the hell? This is amazing. And so his love of literature fed a love of literature into me. I also grew up like super poor. Like I lived with my mom. We were very poor, and the
Mhm.
library was refuge, right? The library, we
Yeah.
could go to the library. I could fucking check out any book in the world, and so
Mhm.
we really relied on the library, and it just created this lifelong love of writing and or reading, and then through that I was like, I want to do this. I think I could do this. And so I very lazily kind of tried, in high school I wrote here and there. I did a couple of zines. Nothing very good, nothing that stands the test of time. I don't think I have any of it even. But then I think I was like around 20, and I lived in a small town in Wisconsin for a couple years, 3 years, and I found out about NaNoWriMo. And this
Mm.
is this is like we're talking like 2002.
Yep.
So pretty early days of, as far as I know at least, of NaNoWriMo. And so for those 3 years that I lived there, I had like nothing. I had nothing to do. I had a very small handful of friends who lived in this town I lived in that I had like developed from the warehouse and production, like assembly line jobs I worked. And so I would
Mhm.
see them on occasion, but mostly kept to myself and just had a lot of time when I wasn't working. Like I would work temp jobs. That's all you could get. I would get a temp job and it would last anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months, and then it would go away. And sometimes I wouldn't have a job for like 4 months. And I
Oh
would
god.
just be like going crazy, being like, I need to
Yeah.
get out of this small town. I need to get back to Minneapolis. I don't have any money. I barely have any friends. What am I doing? And so every year in November, I poured all of that into writing a novel.
Mhm.
And I finished three. I finished one every year, and they'll never see the light of day. They aren't good. Um, right. But that was me learning how to write, or at least
Yeah.
the beginning stages of learning how
Yeah.
to write.
The experimentation.
Yeah. And then that kind of ended up pivoted. I've been a part of since high school. I've been a part of like the underground music scene, like punk, hardcore metal. I played in a ton of bands, and I've just kind of been around in those communities for a long time. And that writing thing started clicking more with doing nonfiction and journalist stuff, like
Okay.
journalistic writing. So I had a couple zines I did, and then I wrote for some zines, and then eventually when I found myself back in Minneapolis, we had an alternative weekly here that doesn't exist anymore. And at the time my partner she's a graphic designer, and she was their designer, like doing all layout
Okay.
covers and stuff. And so she kind of got me as an in to do freelance journalism. So I'd write like about upcoming shows, or I would write about art gallery events that we would go to, right?
Mhm.
Like do show write ups of shows I had gone to. And it just sort of started like trickling in these little, like doing these kind of side. I was working in a warehouse, but I'd be like, yeah, I can write a 1,000-word thing on a show that we went to last weekend for
Yeah.
$75. I can do that. That's like
Yeah.
extra money in my gas tank. That's extra food in the fridge. And so I
Mhm.
just kind of did that here and there. And then I kept getting really frustrated, feeling like I wasn't able to like stretch those creative muscles. And it just kind of this meandering path towards like, I think I should keep writing fiction. I should write fiction. I should write fiction. And for
Mhm.
a long time within that, I was doing more experimental, like short form writing, doing a lot of just expressive stuff, just emotional stuff, kind of vignettes. I was reading all of this like transgressive and experimental literature. So that's where my brain
Mm.
was at. And so I was
Gotcha.
writing a lot of stuff in that vein. And then Emma, Alice Johnson, kept encouraging me. She's like, because I would talk about writing constantly, right? It's like,
Mhm.
that like we've all been there, right? Where it's either you or someone who's like, "Oh, I'm going to write this book, though. I'm really going to write this book, or I should write this
Mhm.
story." And it's like well, then do it. You have to do it. Yeah, at a certain point, you have to stop just talking about it.
Yeah.
You have to sit down and you have to do it. And it was kind of her pulling me, like just tugging me towards this, like you should start doing it. You should start doing it. You should start doing it. And I was like, I should start doing it. And then I started, and then she was like, I'm going to start Weird Punk, and let's do these anthologies, and you can co-edit them. And also, we both have to write a piece for them, and it has to be good. And so I was like, I guess I'm doing this now. And why horror, and why specifically weird horror, also just stretches back into like my childhood. My dad didn't care what we rented at the video store. So
Mhm.
I have, like, he was the first person that showed me Bela Lugosi's Dracula. He was also
Okay.
he was the first person that showed me, and that I was probably 6 or something when he showed me that. It was on like a red shelled VHS tape that scared the shit out of me. Just the tape itself was like
Mhm.
terrifying to me. But we watched it, and it scared me, but I was like, this is so cool. Like these sets, this atmosphere. And I'm saying that now as a 42-year-old adult. I probably wasn't thinking exactly in those terms at 6, but like the movie magic of that movie really grabbed me. And then it
Yeah.
wasn't like a year, maybe 2 later, that he's like, let's watch Evil Dead. And
Oh God.
yeah, I think I was like
Oh.
8 the first time I saw Evil Dead. And after that, it was just like, let's get Nightmare on Elm Street, let's get Sleepaway Camp, let's get Friday the 13th, let's get,
Mhm. All
Texas
the
Chainsaw
classics.
Massacre. Like, just started renting everything that we could because he didn't care. He just like, whatever. And so that the genre itself has always been something I've loved. And then it was kind of in high school that I started exploring the weirder end, right? You start seeing the like,
Yeah.
now I've never heard of that one. What is Dead Ringers? Like,
Mhm.
what is The Brood? What is Society? What is this movie? And bring it home and find out it's like this, oh my God, this like broke my brain in a way that no film ever has. This is transcendent. This is uh just something completely different that isn't relying on all of these kind of tropes that I have become so accustomed and used to. And don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, like I still love that stuff. Like the first Nightmare on Elm Street is a surreal wonderland. Like the imagery in that movie is incredible. Like I genuinely still love a lot of those movies, but truly, like my heart is in the ones that are doing something real weird, something really
Yeah.
different. Even just like the visuals being very strange. So that of course led me down like the path of like a lot of European horror,
Okay.
especially like in my 20s, right? Like I'm a massive Argento fan. I love,
All
Fulci,
right.
like Fulci's The Beyond is heavily referential and influenced by surrealist paintings. And I am a massive fan of surrealism, like the surrealist art
Yeah,
movement. And so
me too.
seeing, right, it's my favorite.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Like Max Ernst is my favorite painter and collage person ever. And seeing like watching The Beyond for the first time, being like 22 or something. Maybe I was in high school the first time I watched it, but it didn't like hit the way when I was like in my early 20s. Watching that and being like, oh my God, like that is a reference to a Max Ernst painting. Like he is pulling, like that's Dolly, like he's pulling from
Mhm.
the visual arts that I am obsessed with, and he's putting them onto screen in a way that I've never seen anyone do. And that is like the magic of storytelling to me. And all of that informed my like how I wanted to approach um, writing, how I wanted to approach storytelling in the way I wanted to tell it, was like including a lot of the ways that those things made me feel. Maybe not including exactly the imagery or exactly like trying to copy what they did, but trying to copy how that made me feel. And I
Yeah.
can't guarantee that does it to anyone else. And I know I'm too inside it when I'm doing it to know if it's actually doing it to me. But right, you read Sabbath of the Fox Devils, you said?
I haven't read it
Oh,
yet.
okay.
I'm terrible, but I do
Oh,
have
no,
it.
that's fine. That's fine. Thank you for
And
buying it. So when you
and
get to it, there's a whole thing in there about this. It's like these consciousnesses inside of him, like pulling at each other. And all of that was me like trying to pull in how looking at certain art makes me feel. Where
hmm,
it's like these kind of cloudy, nebulous things in your brain are like stretching other parts of you and pulling you towards them. That
Yeah.
probably makes no sense to anyone else, but it's how my brain works.
I mean, I think it makes sense, honestly. There is just something about the weird that entices people. And, it doesn't even have to be horror. It can
Yeah.
be, um, other speculative work or um, artwork. It can be, those very strange but beautiful family or kids movies that
Yeah.
came out in the 80s, for
Yes.
instance,
Yes.
um, that have stuck with us for so long.
Yeah.
Um, there is just undeniably something that triggers that feeling of like wanting to know more and also being absolutely horrified. And
Yeah.
Um, so I totally get that. And then especially in the surreal artwork way, um, I am a huge fan of Zdzisław Beksinski,
Oh, yeah.
and and seeing his stuff for the first time a few years ago was a major influence in the Wild Dark and
Yeah.
its many
Okay.
sequels. So, and I know other authors who have, looked at his work and have been inspired by it. So it's it's definitely a movement, and it's definitely a big thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I am fascinated now. I really do want to read Sabbath of the Fox Devils. I bought it because of the cover
Yeah.
initially. Um, and but I'm really interested to see how you've made that connection in there.
Yeah, that
Um,
Michael Bukowski cover really slaps. I also like I know that we both have the, like, love of foxes thing.
oh
I
yeah,
know that's a big thing in your work as
it
well. And
is.
that
Yeah,
cover, that one cover that is the Undead Folk, the cover, right?
yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah.
I love that cover. Like, it's right up my alley.
Thank
But
you.
that fox thing is real.
It is. No, they have this very, strange playfulness to them. Um, but they're kind of like so close to being uh your lovable dog, but at the same time they're just a little stranger and a little more wild and a little weirder, um and that makes them the perfect animal to to do something with horror
Yes,
with.
I very fully agreed, yeah.
um I had a related question
Yeah.
to that, which was, let's see here. um let's see. I can't read my own thing. um so in terms of weird punk, we're gonna switch over to the press.
Yeah.
Um, I did not realize that you started that press with another person. I hadn't realized that. Um, and and so I guess I would like to just know sort of the evolution of when you started to what it is now. Um, kind of the different kinds of weird horror that you've put out, and any that might, I don't know. I don't want to say any that like stand out over others, because they're
Yeah.
all incredible books.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned the pornography for the end of the world one earlier, and I distinctly had that cover in my head because it's such a phenomenal cover.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess really, Yeah, from its inception to where it is now, just kind of the journey of weird punk.
Yeah, for sure. So it was founded by Emma Alice Johnson. She started it. It was her thing, and she brought me on pretty much right away. She brought me on as editor. So
Okay.
the first so that was she started it. She founded it in 2014, and she just came to me and she's like, "I have this idea for an anthology I want to do, where we do a literary tribute to G.G. Allen." For those
Mm.
of you who don't know, G.G. Allen was the worst punk who's ever lived. He was a complete just reprehensible, terrible, scummy piece of shit human being who wanted to make rock and roll dangerous again. And so he would like assault people during their shows. He would strip naked and literally shit on the floor or in his hand and throw it at the audience. He had this whole like antagonism with his fans and with anyone at his shows. He was a bad person as well, just
Yeah.
like I'm not into him.
Yeah.
Emma was more like fascinated by him, but
Yeah.
he was also strangely, and this is like a little controversial, we were both kind of the camp that he was a queer icon, a very problematic queer
Okay.
icon, but he was like down with anybody. Like he did not care.
Mhm.
Um, so some kind of queer, but
Yeah.
he was terrible. And I don't want to like recommend anybody check out his music. I don't want to recommend anybody get
Yeah.
into him. But the thing about G.G. Allen, that Emma's premise for this, it was too good. She said, what if he didn't make sense in our world, but we have writers of weird fictions in general, varieties of horror, bizarro, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever. We have writers of weird stuff. Take him and put him into situations and worlds where it makes sense for him to be.
Huh.
And I went,
Okay.
that's fucking genius. I'm in. I'm on board. And so
Yeah.
that was the first book, and it came out in 2015. And the whole time we were doing it, it was, it's a process, right? Like doing
Sure.
an
Yeah.
anthology, especially when you've never done one, it's a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of work. It's a lot of challenges, it's a lot of stress, and it's a lot of unknown. Like even just we don't really know fully how to do this. We're just figuring it out as we go. We're
Yeah.
trying to raise the money so we can pay the authors, blah blah blah. I'm like getting it all sorted out. And we did. And the whole time we were doing it, she was like, I don't think I ever want to do this again. Like, this is great. It will be great. It's so
Yeah.
stressful and it's so much work. And I don't think I ever want to do it again. And the
Yeah.
day that we did a Kickstarter for it to like fund it. And the day that we packed orders, I went over because we had a special tier that was limited to 100 with a different cover that was
Mhm.
signed. We had a regular version that I think we also had a signed tier or not. We had art. We had like posters you could get. We had all of this extra stuff. And so I
Oh,
went over to her apartment to like pack everything up. And, so she's not doing it alone. So we pack
yeah.
all the orders. We get done. It's a long day. As we're getting done, we're like putting the last address label or whatever, like on the last package. And she looks at me and she goes, I have the idea for the next book.
Mhm.
And she was like, I don't think we should quite start it yet, but like
Yeah.
soon I'll hit you
Yeah.
up. And I was like, okay, cool. That sounds great. We wrap up. I go home. The next day she calls me or texts me or whatever. She's like, here's what we're doing. So then the next book, so that was 2015. The next book, which came out in 2016, was Hybrid Moments, a literary tribute to the Misfits. And
Oh, okay.
the prompt there was different. We're both huge Misfits fans, especially in classic era. But the big prompt there wasn't take the Misfits and put them in a story. That's not that
Yeah.
interesting. It was take Misfits songs, like classic era, Danzig era Misfits songs that aren't already attached to a movie, right? A lot of them are influenced by
Okay.
movies.
Yeah.
Some aren't. Take one that's not already influenced by an existing story and write the story that you think the song is, or write a story
Cool.
based on the lyrics to some degree. It didn't need to be super strict. So we did that, and the same thing, like Kickstarter, everything. We That went off even better. Great success, for what it was for a small press anthology, second
Yeah.
anthology, and not a lot of people knew who we were. But like we're a scrappy little thing that she started, and we're doing it. So
So
we
cool.
we get done with that, and the next anthology, she goes, so I have the idea for the next one. Again, I think it was like the next day. I have the idea for the next one. Zombie punks fuck off. So
All right.
zombie stories that are very punk.
Nice.
And she said, but I don't want to edit it. Like, I don't want to be the editor on the book. She's like, I'll edit the stories, like copy edit, because that's what
Mhm.
she does for a living anyhow. She loves to do that. So she was like, I'll do that part of it, but like, you are
Mhm.
the editor on this book.
Yeah.
You are in charge.
Nice.
He was like,
Okay.
I'm publishing it and I'll do that editing thing, but like, you are the editor. You're doing everything else. You're curating it. You're blah, 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 blah. Figure out art. We talked, that was a big conversation because she was paying
Yeah.
for it. This is like her business. But so we
Yeah.
do that. We are in the process of doing this book when my wife died.
Yeah.
So it was 2017. The book was supposed to come out in October of 2017. My wife died in August. And obviously, this anthology is not it, right? This isn't my
Yeah.
concern. This isn't my concern at all. But also, Mo, my late wife, was my biggest supporter. I mean, just as a person, but also like the press, my own writing. She was so highly encouraging
Yeah.
and so supportive. She would always, like with the Kickstarter, she would back them, and she would always, and she didn't need to, like, but she wanted
Yeah.
to, and she would back them, and she would wait until the final day to be like, if you're not quite over the hump, like, I'll be the one that like gets you there. Like, she always just was just so supportive. And so eventually, like, it started weighing on me that this book was left unfinished. And it was to the point where like we had all of the stories.
Yeah.
We had the art. It was Michael Bukowski who did the later did the Sabbath of the Fox Devils art and also did the new Flesh art. He did the art for it. It's phenomenal. Like, the book was basically ready to go. The authors just needed to be paid. It needed one final editing pass, and then needed to be like fully assembled and like
Yeah.
uploaded. It was so close to finished. And so about a year after Mo died, it had started like eating the back of my brain. I was like, she would want this to see the light of day. Like,
Yeah.
this has been important to me, and it was important to her. And so I can't just let this linger. And obviously, none of the authors were like on my case about it. Everybody was so understanding, but there's a part of me, because who I am, that I kept going like, I'm failing these people, right? They all wrote stories for this, and I want to make sure that like it comes out and they're not waiting and waiting and waiting. And again, like, no one was hassling me. Everybody was incredible, but it was a personal thing. Like,
Yeah.
I also wanted to get it done. I wanted it to be off my plate and into the world, and to just be what it was, and kind of in her memory in a strange way. So about August 2018, I hit Emma up and I was like, I think I'm ready. Like, I think I'm ready to see this through, to finish these last steps. I'm in a
Mhm.
place where I'm no longer like actively thinking about killing myself every moment of every day. I think I can do this, and I think doing this will be good for me. It'll be a thing to focus on, and it
Mhm.
will end, which will like feel nice to have conclusion to something that's good
Yeah.
and feels good. And Emma was like, okay, that's super awesome. Like, I absolutely love that. By the way, in the meantime of like everything that's happened and just other stuff in my life, I'm kind of over this publishing thing and I just want to do other stuff. And I
Mhm.
went, okay, that's cool and very understandable. And like, she and Mo were really close too. And I always kind of wondered if, Mo's death was part of that, for her. But I know she wanted to do other stuff, and she went, "You're the only person it makes sense to give the press to. I can either, if you don't want it, I can let it die. It can just go away, or you can take it over."
Mhm.
And I had a lot of internal kind of battle with that. Like, should I do this? Should I not? Should I do this? Should I not? And it's an interesting thing to say that now, and to like recognize that I felt that way, that I felt very conflicted about it, because all through my 20s, I wanted to run a press. I wanted to start my own publishing house. It was like my dream. And the reason I think that I had so much trepidation about it was that, like, this was Emma's vision, right?
Yeah.
This was her baby. She brought this into the world in the way that she wanted to, with her passion. And I was there and I helped and I did my part.
Mhm.
It was her vision, and this was her, uh, this was all like her soul was
Yeah.
in, she put that into this. And I think the battle was like, if I take it over, I'm not getting rid of that history, but I need to change the press.
Yeah.
Because at that point, like, I love punk. Like I said, this has been a part of my life, my whole life. I've played in bands since high school. I like love that stuff so much, but I was really over books that were punk aesthetic forward. And
Yeah.
that's the least interesting part of punk to me. What's important about punk to me is the ethos behind it, is the DIY, the egalitarian, the anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, queer-friendly,
Yeah.
all of the radical politics, like the anarchist politics that comes with it, it should come with it.
Yep.
I guess, like, parts of that world to me is like what it should be. Like the whole DIY thing is what's important to me about punk beyond anything else. And don't get me wrong, I fucking love those songs. I love a lot of
Yeah, of
the bands, and
course.
all stuff feeds into that. But like, what truly got me into that, what really clicked for me was all of the ethics. And I went like, okay, if I'm gonna take over Weird Punk, I need to pivot the punk nature of the press to how I operate the press, which,
Yep.
to her credit, that's how Emma operated the press too in general. So it's not like that was a big maneuver, but
Mhm.
but I was like, it's becoming that. It's becoming the ethic behind which I work. Like,
Yeah.
so, and the rest of it, I have to align the rest of the vision of the press with what I want to see in the world,
Yep.
which is weird horror, which is these books that like push against the boundaries of the genre. Everything I talked about earlier, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I took it on. I went, okay, I'll do it. And so Zombie Punks Fuck Off, I had never done any of the back end stuff, right? I just served
Mhm.
as editor. I just helped curate stories and edit stories, like
Yep.
do stuff like that. I had never, I'd have pick out artists and, talk about
Yep.
art, but I had never done templates for covers. I had never done uploading files. I had never done internal
Yep.
formatting. So, and I was like, I want this book out now. I want this book out in October. Like, it is August.
Yeah.
I need to get this done. And I didn't know how. So I hit up Christoph, Paul, and Lisa from Clash,
Mhm.
who are
Okay.
old friends. Like, and I, I was like, hey, I have this thing. It's done.
Mhm.
Would you like to, would you be willing to, I don't know if you would like to, would you be willing to co-release this as a like weird punk slash Clash collaboration? And they we kind of went back and forth about it, and they were like, yeah, let's do it. And they were so understanding of where I was at and my position and the history of the book, and were
Yeah.
so helpful in making it happen. And we did a thing where, like, I had paid for the art, so then they paid for the stories, or the other way around, I don't remember which. and then we did a royalty split, just 50-50
Nice.
for each
Yep.
press, and it came out under them, like it's their ISBN.
Yep.
But and it's still they still have it. I think I'm going to get it back from them at some point. We've talked about it. This isn't breaking
Yeah.
news. They they have a cajillion books. So Christoph has even been like, we should give that back to you. You don't have as many titles as we do. It kind of gets lost for us now, all these years later. But so it came out, and it was, I don't know, there was like, didn't blow up the world, but like I was so immensely proud of it and so happy that it came out. And then that chapter of Weird Punk closed. Like, I
Yeah.
don't keep that. Like, that book is in print because of them. I don't stock it in the Weird Punk store. I don't have anything against it. It
Sure.
just is the end of that chapter for Weird Punk.
Yeah.
And so what I have what happened next was the new Flesh, the literary tribute to David Cronenberg, which Brendan and I, the night we met, we were like, somebody should do that, because
Mhm.
the Lazy Fascist or Eraserhead had put out, Cameron Pierce had edited, and one of those presses had put out In Heaven Everything is Fine, a literary tribute to David Lynch. And this was like
Mhm.
2016 or something, 2014. But Brendan and I were like, when's the other David going to get his
Yeah.
anthology? And we were like, if no one else is, we should do it before someone else does it. And I had
Mhm.
actually brought that project to Emma. I was like, I have this idea that Brendan and I have this idea that we would want to do. Would you want to do this? And she was like, yeah, it's just really not right for like my vision of weird punk, which is where
Yeah.
weird fictions in in plurality meet punk
Yeah.
rock. And so once I took over, I was like, this is the project.
Yeah.
Because it's
Nice.
still right, it's still familiar doing the like anthology a year. Do an
Yep.
anthology a year. This is what I know, so I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna like swing it to these other things that I love. And that was the big turning point for the press. And then 2020 was when the first novella came out. And I had been like kicking around the idea of wanting to do solo author work. Um,
Mhm.
but I wasn't quite sure. And I talked to Emma about it, just picking her ear, like being like, "Can you just tell me what you think about this?" And her big piece of advice, which I have followed to the ends of the earth, is you don't fuck with other people's money. She's like, if you're doing this, you have to treat this part of it deadly serious,
Yep.
because that all like those royalties. That's how someone pays their gas.
Yep.
Right. That's how someone buys groceries. That's how, like, you have to, even if it's like, oh, this author has a day job, like, nope, fuck that. Like, you can't be lax about this. You
No.
have to treat this side of it like a fucking business, like a professional. You can be as punk rock, upstarty, weird little thing as you want as DIY. You do not fuck with that. Like, you treat that as deadly as it can be taken. And so I was like, okay, learned, like heard, I will do that. And that
Yep.
has been the case ever since. But I keep looking up here because this is where the weird punk,
Yep.
this is where I keep all of them, or
The
like
shelf.
anything I've put out or I'm in. But Joe Quinnell, who is also like a really close friend and a great writer, wrote the Mud Ballad, and she hit me up. She's not actively writing, but when she was, we would beta read each other's stuff. And
Mhm.
she hit me with an email one day, and she's like, "Hey, so I have this book. It's called The Mud Ballad. I wrote it a couple years ago, and then I reread it, and I thought it was trash. So I just threw it in a folder on my computer, and I haven't looked at it in years." She's like, but then I kept thinking, like, Grindhouse has an open call coming up, and I decided to pull it out and look at it and see if maybe it's not all bad. And she's like, I read it, and I think it might actually be pretty good. Would you read it and let me know? Like,
Mhm.
is it good? Is it bad? Is it worth my time submitting? And so I read it, and I was like blown away by it.
Hmm.
And it's like whiskey burn Southern Gothic, occult noir kind of vibe, like
Nice.
Geek Love, Nightmare Alley, kind of thing. It's like the weirder Lansdale stuff. It's so good. And I read it and I was just floored. And so I was like, hey, uh, Joe, like, Josie, how about maybe it's not right for Grindhouse. Maybe they won't take it. I don't know, but like I will. Will you let me
Mhm.
publish it? And that was the first weird punk title solo author work.
Nice.
And then it's just kind of, yeah, gone from there. And I mean, we're the last, like, Charlene Elsby's book just came out on the 15th.
Mhm.
The organization is here to support you. And that's the 28th Weirdpunk release.
Wow.
Now, that's including those early anthologies. And during that time, Emma put one more book out that I like didn't have anything to do with, but that includes those original 4, and then Zombie Fuck Off, and then the new Flesh On is 28 releases total, and it's crazy. But so if you're like to ask me the other part of your question, right, about like any standouts for the books, and it is the thing, like they're all, I don't publish anything I don't love. I
Yeah.
operate differently than a lot of small presses in that regard. That's no shade to other small presses, but I know small presses who are like, yeah, we publish books we think will sell, and we probably
Yeah.
really like them as well, right? Like generally, but like I only publish a book if I love it. It's just the only way I know how to operate. I can't separate myself and my kind of opinions and thoughts and feelings on art from the press. They're like,
Hey,
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
I love that.
That's what I think too, and that's what I think like gives the press its distinct feeling. Like I
Yeah.
don't, and this isn't a conceited thing. I'm not saying Weirdpunk's the best, but like I'm in the realm of all of the small presses that I kind of, we all swim around each other in these similar oceans. I think, and a lot of them, right, have their own distinct feeling. And I think that's awesome. And I think Weirdpunk also has its own very distinct, and not in the way where the books even feel like the same. They're not the same stories. They're mostly not the same writers. They're very different from each other, but they all feel at home on a shelf next to each other, I think,
Yeah.
because of that
And,
curation.
and you're passionate about all of them, which is like huge.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
huge.
yeah. Well, like I don't, there's no benefit to doing this and not, right, like with things I'm not passionate about. I just
Yeah.
don't see, again, it's like for what, for money? Oh, fuck that. I mean, I want the
Yeah.
press to be good, like solvent and
Sure.
to make
But
the authors money, and I want the books to sell so people read them. I want them in front of people, but I don't, but not to the like detriment of my love of the thing. I have to like
yeah.
love it. I have to want to, that's the only way it works for me. But so I
Yeah.
did, yeah. To answer your like, to point out some favorites, they're
Yeah.
kind of all my favorite, but there are a few that are like specifically really important to me.
Mhm.
The Cinema Viscera, the
Mhm.
movie theater horror anthology, is the gnarliest book I think I've ever put out, and will probably remain the gnarliest book
And
will ever put out. And it's,
absolutely terrifying cover.
yes, yes. So it's funny because I had commissioned different art from an illustrator, Matt Fitzsimmons, who's an amazing illustrator. I had seen his art because Matthew M. Bartlett did that chapbook series.
Oh,
And in
yeah.
like a really early year of that, one of the covers, I was like, that illustration is amazing. Who did that? I like hit Matthew up. I was like, who did that? That's so good. And he was like, oh, it's my friend Matt. Like, I was like, I would love to commission something from him. Um, is that cool with you? I don't want to step on your toes if you're going to do a bunch of stuff with him. And he was like, no, no, no. Here's his email. I'll tell him to expect you. So I hit him up, and we had a really long kind of back and forth conversation about what I wanted and how I was thinking about that book, which was initially like in my head, I had asked the authors, it's some of these, I do these little like invite only anthologies because they're
Mhm.
more fun to me, honestly.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, like as a writer, I love submissions. I love being able to submit. And I'm sorry that I keep the gate closed a lot of the time for Weird Punk, but also it's for my own sanity as a
Sure.
one person operation. And so I
Yep.
just keep, every once in a while I do this little project where I like invite friends whose work I love and who I think will do the project theme really well, like do it
Mhm.
justice.
Yep.
Who might like fit with what they do already, or feel like they could stretch. Like they could stretch themselves into this really well, just knowing their work and knowing them, or they might be really interested in this and haven't written a thing like this yet, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
with that one, I had invited everyone, and my brain was going, yeah, it's like a movie theater horror thing. So everyone will write really fun, schlocky 80s VHS stories. And have no idea why I thought any of us would write that, because that's not really what I publish. And I like
Yeah.
that stuff. That's not a slam on that stuff, but I don't really publish that. So I don't know why my brain went there. So that I commissioned this art off that idea. And
Yeah.
then I started getting the stories in. And I think the first one was Katie Michelle Quinn's story, which is what opens the book. And it's like, this story is bleak as fuck. And then, I read Charles Austin Muir's story, which he was writing during a really intense time with his now late wife dealing with cancer. And it's, again, like, so deeply personal and scarring, that
Yeah.
story. It cuts really deep. And then I read Joe Quinnell's story in there, which is probably the single harshest story I've ever read.
Wow.
Or at least it's up there. And I've read a lot of really fucked up, really intense stuff in my life. Very bleak stuff. That story is like so painful. Like, that story wants to hurt you. And it's all because she was pouring all of her fears as a trans woman into this story. She and I have talked about it, and she said, like, I'll never go there again for fiction. At a point, it
Yeah.
felt like self-harm. Like, but she also was like purging, right? I've experienced that with stories before, where it's like, it like hurts to pull out, but you also have to pull it out.
Yeah.
And that story is like a high water example of that, where it's just like so deeply personal and so dark that it like taxes you to read it. And
Yeah.
and so even just with those three, before the other stories rolled in, the other couple, I looked at the cover that Matt had made, which is great, and I went, this is absolutely not right for this book.
Yeah.
And I hit him up, and he was so gracious about it. I felt really bad, but he was so gracious about it. And I will be using that cover on a zine at some point. But he was very understanding. And then Don Noble did the current cover, and it was like the perfect, like that cover, like you said, like, it's disturbing.
Yeah.
It's hard
Oh
to.
yeah.
Joe Koch, who's also in the book, said that, right? I think now I'm like, I have too many books, but Joe has said that that cover is like not fun. Like, he keeps it like pointed away. Like, he doesn't
Yeah.
want to see it like on his shelf. He never wants to see the front of
Yeah.
that book.
It's like haunted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
It's scary.
It's a cursed object. That entire book is a cursed object. But it's like a cursed object that we all like literally bled to make happen. Yeah, so that one, like, always stands out for me. If people ask me, if I'm like vending and people are like, what's your favorite book? Like, I don't have a favorite. I love them all, but like, that story for me, the story behind the book,
Yeah.
is like a lot. And also will tell people either way if they want to read it or not. Because there are people who don't want to read that, and that's completely legit and totally fine. So I'll get people who go like, that one might be a little too intense. But I also get people who are like, the funniest is, I'll get people who are like, oh, like, I do film studies and I really love horror, and I saw this book, I'm gonna buy it. They'll pick it up and, can I buy this from you? And I always go like, yes, absolutely, but fair warning. Like, here,
Yeah.
this book is very intense, very fucked up. But yeah, so that one stands out. I'm also, again, I think I'm taking the coward's answers with this, because I'm going to point out another anthology, but Profane Altars, Weird Sword and Sorcery, which came out last year, which was, again, me inviting a bunch of friends who are all horror writers who love sword and sorcery as a genre. It's the only genre of fantasy that I really particularly like. And it's one that goes way back. Like, I was, like the Greyhawk, Gary Gygax's Greyhawk books. My dad bought me those when I was a kid. And then in my teenage years, reading Robert E. Howard Conan, getting into Edward Wagner's Kane, like reading that, like Tanith Lee, who straddled so many genres throughout her very prolific and incredible career, but wrote some really wild kind of stuff in the sword and sorcery set. It's just a genre that I've always loved, and I wanted to see what a bunch of contemporary horror writers who also love the genre would do with it, especially if like the idea that please write me a sword and sorcery story, but make it weird horror. And I don't need to go on the full tangent, but I have all sorts of like theories, I guess, about the growth of both fantasy and horror, and how fantasy is kind of two different columns it rose, and one is sword and sorcery and the way that fantasy is connected to weird fiction. Or you think about Clark Ashton Smith, who's kind of one of the big names in original weird fiction writing, part of like the within the kind of quote unquote Lovecraft circle. He was one of the other big cosmic horror guys, and his first two collections are almost entirely sword and sorcery stories. But they're considered weird fiction because it's all weird fucking gods and like cosmic horror and all of this stuff, but it's just set on these third, like, what do they call it? Like third planet. Like it's not our Earth, where it's so past, like it's so far back in history that it predates any known history. We're talking like fiction, right? Like not real. I'm not saying this is real, right? But like at a time so far prehistory that also it has its own prehistory, where there are crumbling ruins of societies that we'll never know about. So that kind of set and setting, I was just like, let's pull that back into horror, back into weird horror. Like these were already together. Kind of the other column of fantasy, right, is like the Tolkien set, the high fantasy and the stuff that's more based on Arthurian legends, epic, where sword and sorcery tends to be small scale. I mean, not always, because you do get some novellas and stuff in that genre. Not a lot of novels, though, so it is really smaller scale. It's not the universe or Earth is going to be destroyed. It's like, I just need to fight this fucked up wizard right now. It's a genre. It's like a genre that I love and have loved. Kind of my interest in it has gone off and on over the years. But I always like, even again, I'm gonna bring Fulci up again. But he made this incredible sword and sorcery movie in the '80s called Conquest that I recommend everyone watch if you're interested in that genre at all. It's so strange and so fun and really cool, and it's filmed really strange, and the whole thing's like hazy and dreamlike. There's a crazy sorceress with a metal face, and it fucking rules.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, it's great. So I asked all of these writer friends, like, write me something influenced by all of this, like, rich, almost like probably entire 100 years of this genre. Write me something influenced by those, but also make it horror to some degree. It doesn't need to be super insane horror. It doesn't, but like pull in weird horror vibes into that, put these things together. And everybody fucking came out aces. Like, I'm so proud of that book. And then the cover, I like the cover is two components, and one is literally a high-res scan that I took of a Ballantine sci-fi horror Lovecraft book that I've had since high school, that has this like frame, and it's literally where the Devil Head Weirdpunk logo comes from. I just ripped it off because it's like a dead brand, but I scanned that frame, removed the painting that was inside of it, and then managed to, with the help of Mike Phillips, who runs From Beyond. Mike is incredible, right? Mike is one of my. There's a lot of favorite people in small press, but Mike is one of my favorite people.
Mike is awesome. Yeah,
absolutely, truly a gem of a human being if I've ever met one. He was instrumental in helping me get in contact with the late artist Jeffrey Catherine Jones's family. Jeffrey Catherine Jones is a pioneering trans painter who died in, I think, like 2008 or something. late aughts, early teens, I think. But she was part of the studio, which was a commune, an art commune. There was like Bernie Wrightson and um, now I can't remember the other two artists and her. Frank Frazetta called her the greatest living painter. She
Wow.
was this painter who did these amazing. A lot of them ended up book covers in the 70s. She also was involved in comics in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
But a lot of her art is on like Robert E. Howard reprints from the 70s. There's a whole line that have her art. She had art on a ton of other books too, just in that paperback era. And I've been looking at her art like on a copy I've had since high school, like looking at this painting of hers, being like, this is like this art has always amazed me, but I knew nothing about her. And I was looking for I wanted that vibe, right? I want if we're gonna do a
Yeah.
sword and sorcery book, I want a cover that feels like the sword and sorcery books that I grew up reading. And so I was trying to find like maybe more slightly obscure artists than someone like Frazetta. I mean, I love Frazetta, but there's no way I was going to be able to afford the license on something like that.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm like looking and I keep coming across her work and keep coming across her work, but she doesn't have, there's no website, there's no like thing dedicated to her career other than like blogs that have done spotlights on her. And I kept coming
Mhm.
across this one image, and it's a painting of Solomon Kane, Robert E. Howard, fighting
Mhm.
a demon. And it's like very dreamlike and intense and really cool. And I went like, I want that to be the cover so fucking bad. And then I started learning about her and learning about her life. And I was
Mhm.
trying everything I could to try to find her family, like the people who own her, you know, her work
Yeah.
state. And there's no, they don't have like a, you know, like Frazetta's daughters made Frazetta girls, right? You can buy shirts, skateboards, prints of Frazetta's work. And they've done a lot of work to like keep him in the conversation of art and
Yeah.
keep his work alive and available. And I couldn't find anything like that for Jeffrey Catherine. And so eventually, like Mike, I was posting about it. Like I'm trying to just on Blue Sky or whatever. And Mike hit me up.
Yeah.
He's like, I can do that. I'm like a wizard. I know how to do this. And it wasn't even a day. And he was like, I have her granddaughter's phone number. I'll be like I texted her or whatever, and I'll let you know what I hear back. And then like
Wow.
the next day, it's like here's her daughter's email address. I have talked to her. She is expecting this email.
All right.
She knows you're interested in some of Jeffrey Catherine's art, and
Damn.
I hit her up, and she was very gracious and had a old colleague was able to scan like high res super intense high res scan. Like I don't think it was an original, but like a super intense, like very accurate print that he had for in
Mm.
his archives. Like this guy whose name I feel bad I don't remember his name, but he was like they had been friends for years, and he swam around the art circles that she did, and so he had all of this stuff of hers, and so he you know, a couple weeks later, this drops into my inbox and it took my breath away.
Man.
And now I've been able to evangelize on her behalf more than anything and try to share
Yeah.
her story. And it's like I didn't know who she was, but I had been looking at her art my whole life. Uh, and like admiring it. And then to find out about her life and to find out she was trans and that she dealt with depression and anxiety her whole life.
Mhm.
She had a family, and you know, she wasn't just some artist on you know that made amazing book covers. Like she had this whole rich life, and I got to like very minorly interact with that legacy
So cool.
and try to keep her in the conversation to the point where I even offered to her daughter, I was like, this is a no pressure situation, but if you ever wanted someone to like build a website and get a bunch of these like get more high res versions from that friend, and have like low res on the website, but then like make available licensing of her art so that her art can continue to be part of the conversation. It can also be like enriching to your family financially.
Mhm.
Doing prints, selling prints, like making licensing of work available for book covers and album covers and all this. Like, I was like, I would be willing to like help take on this task just in the name of keeping her in the conversation and making sure people know her legacy. And she was like, oh yeah, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. And I haven't
Yeah.
heard back, and that was last year, and it's totally fine. But like, that is, I like want people to know who she was, because
Yeah.
an incredible artist and seemed like a really awesome person, and just like what a fucking pioneer, like truly, like what an important thing, like to that she existed.
Yeah. And how meaningful and amazing it is that I mean, you discovered all this and you got her on the cover of that anthology, and
Yeah,
it's
and
so
then
cool.
yeah, and maybe other people already knew, but like it's out there. But yeah, it's I'm very pleased with, so that again, that book has such a story to it with
Yeah.
that, and so I'm so proud of it. And I'm like, that one I'm always also like I was pointing people to, like, I don't know if you like sword and sorcery at all, but hear me out. Like, this book is awesome.
Yeah, and that is available for purchase on
Yeah,
the Weirdpunk website, everybody,
it sure is.
along with Cinema Viscera and Sabbath of the Fox Devils,
Yeah,
and of course the new collection here, um, which the still beating heart of a dead god, which my camera is trying to blur because my camera's evil. Stop it.
it's
um,
too evil to take photos
it's it's trying to blend the background, but it's also somehow blending the foreground.
of.
Um, so we're running a little bit low on time is the
Yeah,
only thing now, but I do want to ask you just the most generic question about your new collection,
yeah,
uh, which is you've had 3 collections so far, is that right?
yeah. This is the
Um,
third. Yeah,
so this one in particular, how does it sort of what sort of sets it apart from your previous 2 collections? What was the idea going into this one?
yeah. So a strange thing happened to me around the time that I was putting together grief rituals, and I don't like the previous collection. I don't
Yep.
think grief rituals has this issue, but I became fundamentally aware of a thing that I was doing in my own work that I realized I hated.
Mm,
And it all stemmed from a specific story that's in grief rituals, uh, where I had written a draft of it and I'd submitted it to a magazine, and it got rejected. And I kind of knew it wasn't great when I submitted it, but deadline was there and I needed to,
mhm.
if I wanted to try, I wasn't going to don't self reject. So I submitted it,
Yep.
was unsurprised by the rejection. And then I sat down with it and I was like, what is it that's not working about this story? And I realized that the protagonist of it was not that like all my protagonists are based on me or anything, right? I mean, often there's influences of my life in them, but they're
Mhm.
not like all a stand-in for me. But what I realized, this protagonist was like a stand-in for a cipher version of myself that I had built for the professional world. Uh,
Okay.
Before COVID, I got laid off when COVID hit. But
Mhm.
before that, I had worked in software for 4 years. I'd worked in tech, junior developer, and then doing support stuff.
Mhm.
And I grew up, like I said, like poverty. Like, we lived in Section 8 housing. We ate food shelf food, donations for clothing, kind of, and thrift store kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I realized that I had been subtly, I guess the term, it's often used for like multiracial people, right? But like code switching. I was
Mhm.
class code switching. I was in these professional environments being like an artificial version of who I am that's very different in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
because it was kind of what was expected of me. Not in a way that anyone said that, right? But the feeling, the internal dialogue, right, is the feeling of like, I can't be who I am fully. I can't talk about like the experiences that some of the experience that I've had, because like
Hmm.
those life experiences aren't like something that it's like okay to talk about, I guess, in front of people who have a very different life experience. And it felt very alienating. So I kind of built subconsciously this other version of myself, and to just get through the day to day. And
Hmm.
that was starting to bleed into my work.
Got it.
And I didn't realize it was happening. And it's not like this is like dissociative or anything, right? But it's just like this kind of a mask I would put on.
Yeah.
And that mask was starting to like fuse, for lack of a better term. It was like starting to fuse to my face. And so then it's like starting to trickle into this thing that's supposed to be like, here's my soul, like to me at least, here's my soul laid bare on paper. Um, and so in realizing that and kind of then coming to terms with it and then processing it, I realized that like I should definitely not do that in general, but I should extra not do that in my work.
Hmm.
And I I don't know, it got like really existential, and
Yeah.
I realized like, oh my god, that's why this story didn't work. It's because it's not rooted in like who I am. It's rooted in an artificial version that I'm presenting to people
Mm.
in a professional environment. And that
Yeah.
person isn't real. That person doesn't have my past. That person doesn't have a past. That person is just there to do a job. And I
Yeah.
hated that. So I rewrote that story entirely, and I was like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start tapping into both my like poverty, which has been a life defining thing my whole life, but also a lot of my like 20s spent as a shitty punk. And I'm still a shitty punk, but like I'm a nicer, less grumpy, shitty punk who drinks a lot. And so Dead God has a lot of those stories where I was like, no, I'm going to start pulling in all of this other stuff that like either from my life or has informed my life or I've seen in my life through the lens of like being a shitty punk or a dumb fucking like super broke teenager getting into trouble, or like, so a lot of the stories have a through line of either kind of shithead punks or art. I was also like, I want to focus a lot on like weird underground art because I love that stuff too. So there's like common landmarks that people who are from Minneapolis, especially who lived here 20 years ago, but also some that still exist, like throughout multiple stories, like I call it a different name a couple times, but like the same art gallery, like DIY space art gallery that used to exist here appears in
Hmm.
like 4 different stories in that collection. And all of
Okay.
those, it's not some Laird Barron thing where I have everything mapped out in my brain, but a lot of that stories in that collection take place in the same universe in
Okay.
Minneapolis specifically. And they might be
Gotcha.
in different times. They might be like From the Past Comes the Storm takes place in the 90s, but it takes place in a house that I lived in. Like things like that, where I'm like piecing
Yeah.
together fragments of my life in subtle ways where it's not like this isn't about me, but like putting characters in familiar places to me, which might also, if you've spent the right era and the right scenes and communities in Minneapolis, you might actually recognize. And I had someone, the story in there, Meslith, which was originally in Filthy Loot's anthology Soft Ceremonies. I had I sell books at this store here in Minneapolis called Odd Mart. They also do events, so I've done a lot of markets there. And I had
Hmm.
someone who came up to me who was like, "Hey, I read your story in Soft Ceremonies, Meslith. That story was awesome. I just moved to Minneapolis and I'm reading it, and I realized I know the co-op you're talking about. I know the liquor store you're talking
Mm,
about. I think I know the apartment that this story is set in based on the geography of
it's
the
so cool.
I was like, yeah, that is the apartment I'm talking about. And so I like wanted to pull in all of this other personal stuff. Feel like for so long, like right with my first collection with Tualo, that was all like stories about Mo dying. Even if
Yeah,
those stories aren't directly about spousal loss, they were all a reaction to her death and me processing
yeah,
through that. And that has remained true. There's still a lot of that in stories that you might not even like see that in, right? Like that. So I carry that wound with me always, and
yeah,
I carry her with me always. And so that is informing a lot of the work as well. But there's kind of been a mostly deliberate for my own artistic sanity shift to like, yes, I still write widower narratives. A lot of my work still has grief components and will always have grief components, but those
mhm,
things are starting to get different. Those things are starting to
yeah,
be different and look different and be very different types of stories that I'm still just trying to put those emotions into so that the reader feels. Because that to me is the like that's all I want is the human, like the bloody human core at the center of
yeah.
any of my books, but also any of the books I put out. They may get crazy, they may get super weird, they may get super out there, but really the common theme with Weird Punk is that they all have bloody human hearts.
Wow. This one is a bloody human heart, but still beating heart uh, of a dead god. And for those of you watching, you really, really, really need to get this. I'm going to read the back cover copy so that you can be enticed by what's inside. It says a drunk widower wanders through an endless abandoned mall while the war machine marches. 90s queer metalheads repeatedly try to burn down a regenerating church, which, like, sounds amazing. Um, Denizens of a punk house are confronted with the reality of what happened to their missing roommate. An artist with acidic bodily fluids finds another like him. Like, holy shit. With the still beating heart of a dead god, award winning author Sam Richard returns with 11 new stories exploring the raw honesty of grief, isolation, brokenness, and desperation through weird horrors ranging from body to cosmic to existential and beyond. Um, I mean, I cannot wait to dig into this. I honestly wanted to dig into this this past weekend. I have been reading, basically reading a new book every week.
Wow.
And and this week I got behind because I was editing something and that took priority.
Yeah.
Um so this is my like my next read. Taking that to AuthorCon with me.
Oh,
Can't wait.
nice.
Yeah.
I hope
Uh,
you have fun at AuthorCon. Hell yeah. I wish I could be there this year, but I could not.
yeah, it's I mean, it's a expensive weekend
Yes.
to try and make happen, but it's fun.
Yeah. Well,
That's where I met you.
yeah, that's where we got to meet in person for the first time. And I was just like, I was so overjoyed to actually get to meet you because I know we've crossed paths here and there on the internet. And I've always thought you were really cool. And then meeting you in person, you're just
Aw,
like, you're very much a joy to be around and you're so kind.
that's
And it was,
that's so sweet of you to say.
no, it
I
was
am like,
really, yeah,
uh, I'm
there
so
was a couple
depressing.
oh, no, there was a couple people who I was, like, really looking forward to finally meeting in person, and you were one of them. Christina Osborne, who runs Trueborn,
I
was
love
also one of them,
Christina.
who's yeah, Christina is, like, also just, like, an utter sweetheart of a
Yeah.
person, just, like, so nice and so cool, and then, like, meeting the both of you that weekend were, like, very big standouts for me of, like, what
Aw,
awesome people in this community, like, yeah, but so it was really good to meet you in person at that.
same. I mean that show, going to that show made such a difference in my career, and not just in my career, but also just in like understanding and knowing the community, where the heart beats,
Yeah,
because there's only so much you can learn about people online.
for sure.
There's only so much that you can do to really, I don't know, communicate and network, and it's just, uh some of us are really are really bad in person about meeting people. Like we're super awkward,
Oh,
um and that is totally what I am.
you're great. You're great.
But uh but again, meeting you, that I think it was the first show, the
Yeah.
first AuthorCon. That was, yeah, wonderful. Um and I'm sorry it's taken me four years to get you on the show,
Oh, that's totally fine.
um,
Completely fine.
but I have to say, I think so far this particular episode has been one of the most fascinating, and one of the most that I've learned like a shitload from.
Oh, good.
So I'm like, I'm feeling a very renewed, like, I want to write more weird horror,
Yes, do
um,
it. Do it.
from this conversation.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Like this was awesome. This was a great conversation.
Um, Last question.
Yeah.
Where can everybody find you and keep in touch with what you've got going on?
Yeah, the main hub is weirdpunkbooks.com. You can order, if you're in the US, physical copies of any of the books there. And I am like truly a one person operation. So if I get an order in the store, I'm the one, it's not drop shipped or anything. I literally pack it up and hand write your address on a mailer and send it out Tuesdays and Fridays.
Mhm.
And if you are not in the US, the books are available wherever generally. Or if you're in the US and you want to, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever. They're also available in ebook kind of most places. I just haven't set that up on the website yet, so I can't sell ebooks on. I will at some point. I'm just lazy. And then beyond that, both at Weird Punk Books or at Sammy Totep, Totep. Um, I'm on Instagram and Blue Sky primarily. There's also a Weird Punk TikTok. I don't have a Twitter on either anymore. I deleted them both because, everything. And I don't have a personal TikTok. There's just a Weird Punk one, and it's not very active. But if you're on there, it is on there with maybe 8 or 10 very short videos. And then I'm also on Facebook, but I don't add people who I don't actually know or haven't
Yeah.
like interacted with enough. Like there was a while where I had all these stranger authors, and I ended up like I just want to be people I'm connected with
Yeah.
beyond we're just both in the community. Like if we've interacted, you can add me there, but otherwise, I'm also a little bit active on the New Edge Sword and Sorcery Discord. Not super prolifically, but I'm on there every now and again. Oliver is doing such a cool thing with that magazine, and the community that's kind of come up around it is really cool and really inviting and very diverse and very queer friendly. And this is my cat Bathory. She's very cute.
Oh,
But yeah, so I'm on there sometimes. With it, if you're into sword and sorcery at all and you like Discord, I highly recommend that one just because there's lots of good conversations about the genre and other genres and just fun stuff going on. That's pretty much it. I'm not super active on the internet these days, here and there, but yeah,
no,
mostly Instagram and Blue Sky.
you got too much else to do. You're
Real, and I'm trying to get a real job. I've been doing just Weird Punk since 2021, but I need to get a real job again, so I'm about to be even busier.
Yeah, that's yeah, the working a full-time job and being the single person that runs a press is okay, don't attack cat. I have mine as attacking. Is definitely a thing. It anytime you can support a small press, especially a small press that is run by, one or two people even, is amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if
And I
you're
will
out there
sorry.
buying books, consider, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I will also say, like, when I do events, my partner Jess is very helpful and is generally also just very supportive. She doesn't do
Mhm.
day-to-day stuff, but she does help
Yeah.
sometimes. So I'm just mostly entirely alone, but she does help.
Yep. No, I'm very much the same. If I go to an event with my partner in crime, Colin is there to keep me sane. Uh,
It's the support of a partner in this doing this stuff is it's like essential for
oh yeah,
saving's sake, especially events, and especially those events with the really long multiple days. It's like
yeah,
we're gonna be tabling for 8 hours or sometimes 10 hours.
yep,
Come hang out with me, please, and help keep me sane.
yeah. Like, yes.
Yeah.
Um, my gosh. Oh, I'm just thinking about I'm thinking about next week now, and
Yeah, sorry. Yes. Yeah,
uh,
it'll be fun, but it's always a lot of work.
well, to the end of our program, I would like to thank you for coming on and talking with us about weird horror tonight. Um, you've been wonderful. I've learned so much, and uh, and thank you to the audience for stopping in and listening to us talk. Um, and if you happen to miss this episode, or you know people who have missed this episode, you can always watch these. They're on my YouTube channel. You can go back and watch any of them at any time. Oh my God, there's a cat. Um, and the next show is tomorrow night, because we have back-to-back shows this week. We get JC Morris in the house to talk about Indigenous horror, which is a very important genre right now. And JC is an amazing author and happens to be my co-editor at Third State. So it'll be lovely to have him on the show. Until then, we will bid you adieu. Thank you, and hope you guys have a great evening.